In 2022, Netflix released a movie titled White Noise, based on the 1985 novel of the same name. The film is about a small town in Ohio that suffers from a cataclysmic environmental accident caused by a train derailment, which casts a huge cloud of toxic chemicals across the landscape. And then, 1 year later in 2023, in real life, it actually happened. Keep in mind that a lot of stuff I'm going to be covering today isn't exactly fully confirmed. New information may come out later. I'm just going to be presenting to you what I've dug up. On February 3rd, 2023, a train owned by the Norfolk Southern Corporation derailed in the town of East Palestine, Ohio. Nobody was hurt in the initial event, but approximately 50 of the 141 cars came off the tracks, with 20 of them containing hazardous chemicals, 14 of them specifically containing vinyl chloride. Initial reporting of the event by the legacy media downplayed the possible danger of chemical contamination, instead opting to focus on how quickly Norfolk Southern managed to get services up and running again. Nonetheless, the Environmental Protection Agency was on the scene, monitoring the air and water. By February 5th, authorities noticed a temperature change in one of the cars and believed that an explosion was imminent in the next few days. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine ordered an evacuation of the area, and the next day, February 6th, the remaining 5 tanks of vinyl chloride underwent a controlled release and burn. This does mean that the chemicals were burnt and expelled into the atmosphere, but it was meant to prevent an even larger disaster of an uncontrolled explosion. However, there was a problem. Here's the projected contamination map of the town. It turns out the actual contamination was significantly wider, like 3 states and parts of southern Canada wider. By February 7th, meteorologists had noticed that a weather phenomenon known as an inversion layer had trapped the chemicals, preventing them from dispersing. Normally, air temperature decreases as altitude increases, but sometimes, due to natural weather cycles, warmer air is held above cooler air. This is what causes smog to linger in a city sometimes, for example. When an inversion layer is finally broken due to shifting pressure, it often results in a thunderstorm. Kinda like how in summer it's often really muggy, and then after you get a day of rain, it's hot and dry afterward. Basically, inversions are completely normal and common, but in East Palestine, it had catastrophic consequences. The dark clouds of vinyl chloride and other chemicals were trapped lower to the ground and more concentrated than they should have been. We're now over a week after the burn, and the chemical cloud continues to linger, covering areas within Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, with minor amounts being detected as far as Detroit and Toronto as the weather pushes the cloud north. That being said, it also has significantly diminished over time. The EPA recorded an increase in volatile organic compounds in the air, as well as an increase in particulate matter, across February 7th and 8th. Norfolk Southern also began cleanup operations of affected water and soil. The EPA lifted the evacuation order on February 9th, claiming that the air inside the evacuation zone had returned to normal levels, and that the drinking water was tested to be safe. The EPA only found contamination within that initial zone east of town. Furthermore, 210 homes have been tested at the request of residents by both Norfolk and the EPA, and all tests have come back negative. However, people on the ground aren't convinced. There are reports coming from residents in the town, with photo and video, all showing the same thing. Lots of dead fish and frogs in the creeks around town. Waterways layered with a strange, white, foam-like chemical. Reports of both pets and livestock suffering serious illness or death after remaining outside for a period of time, as well as a strange taste and smell in the air. Residents are also noticing these trucks driving around handling these incidents, from a company called EnviroScience, which specializes in time-sensitive environmental cleanup. Now, it's not like there's anything shady about Ohio employing companies like EnviroScience. That's exactly what you'd want to see happen. But it does make the claim of everything's fine here, there's no contamination, ring a little bit hollow from a layman's perspective. Plus, the fact that the EPA said there's no contamination, go home, while at the same time, the Ohio Department of Health's director urged people with private wells to have that water tested.
We have strongly encouraged all of those people on private wells to get their wells tested, and that will be done at no cost to them. This is something that is part of the remediation, and it's very important for the reasons I just described.
Now, it's obvious to me that the reason owners of private water sources are being asked to get them tested is because the government can't test everything unprompted. But to your average person, it's understandable why they'd have some reservations, when the official messaging doesn't seem to line up with their own experiences. By February 14th, we had learned that significantly more chemicals had been spilled by the disaster than was initially estimated. Towns outside the evacuation zone began to experience the same smells and tastes in the air, and local waterways that feed into the Ohio River, which remember feeds into the Mississippi River, have confirmed to be contaminated. The EPA claims that despite these dramatic reports from local people, they haven't noticed a significant rise in the numbers of dead fish, and their containment efforts have kept most of the pollution out of the Ohio River, keeping it within the local watershed. However, News on the Ground interviewed a local firefighter and hazardous materials specialist who believes that the whole thing has been handled improperly.
We basically nuked a town with chemicals so we could get a railroad open.
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency sent a letter to Norfolk Southern stating that ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, ethylexyl-acrylate, and isobutylene were also in the rail cars that were derailed, breached, or on fire. Caggiano says ethylexyl-acrylate is especially worrisome. He says it's a carcinogen, and contact with it can cause burning and irritation in the skin and eyes. Breathing it in can irritate the nose, throat, and cause coughing and shortness of breath. Isobutylene is also known to cause dizziness and drowsiness when inhaled. I was kind of surprised that when they quickly told the people they can go back home, but then said if they feel like they want their homes tested, they can have them tested. I would have far rather they did all the testing. Caggiano says it's possible some of these chemicals could still be present in homes and on objects until you clean them thoroughly. There's a lot of what ifs, and we're going to be looking at this thing 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line and wondering, gee, cancer clusters could pop up, well water could go bad.
Here's a quick rundown on the dangers of these chemicals. Exposure to the main chemical, vinyl chloride, seems to be quite awful. Brief exposure of 300 parts per million causes liver damage in humans. An experiment that exposed rats to 250 parts per million for 4 hours resulted in liver cancer. OSHA defines the permissible exposure limit for vinyl chloride to be 1 part per million for 8 hours a day, and 5 parts per million is only permissible for 15 minutes a day. We don't know the exposure level of vinyl chloride in the area yet, but the EPA is claiming it's not above 1 part per million. The choice to burn the vinyl chloride was initially a good one. It would have allowed the chemical to rise into the air and dilute, if not held in place by an induction layer. And it's not like they could have helped the weather because the tanks were about to blow anyway. There's nothing else they could do. But more importantly, burning vinyl chloride turns it into 2 other compounds, CO2 and hydrogen chloride. We all know what CO2 is. We breathe it out and it's also a common greenhouse gas. But hydrogen chloride is tricky. It's dangerous at high levels on its own, but the worst danger in this scenario is when it comes into contact with water, it turns into hydrochloric acid. This is the chemical that your stomach digests food with, and at high enough concentrations, it can dissolve stone and metal. If the EPA is wrong and there actually is more dead wildlife and pets and livestock than usual, it's entirely possible it's going to be because of hydrogen chloride reacting with water in the river, killing the fish and frogs, and reacting with water in or on plants, killing animals who come into contact with it. There is at least one report of somebody who drove through a rainstorm in the affected area and claimed that the water eroded part of their car. Now, there are some kooks out there who are claiming that this whole thing is deliberate, that Biden is dragging his feet to help Ohio because the affected areas heavily voted for Trump. That's a fun conspiracy theory, but there's no proof of it. It's the same thing that leftoids accused George Bush of with regards to Hurricane Katrina relief, though, so I guess what goes around comes around. There's also people saying that the affected area is one of the few locations that Vanguard, BlackRock, and JP Morgan hasn't been able to take control of the land yet, so this is a plan by the New World Order to make the area uninhabitable to advance the Great Reset and the new normal. But again, there's no proof of that either. And there likely never will be, because that's some insane tinfoil hat bullshit. Part of the conspiracy theory surrounding this whole event stemmed from the fact that a journalist was arrested for reporting on it on the ground in Ohio. This made the rounds on rightoid Twitter, fueling the conspiracy further that the left-wing federal government was more than happy to suppress this story and let the people of the heartland burn to death in acid rain or something. But again, that's not the full story. What actually happened was Evan Lambert, a reporter for News Nation, was arrested during a press conference because he disrupted it by arguing.
Continue to argue. Go. Now. Go. Now. Or you can go to jail. Sir. You want to go to jail for criminal trespassing? Do you want to go to jail for criminal trespassing? Do you understand?
You know how quickly our lawyers will get me out?
I don't care.
Sir, can we
I don't care.
Just talk outside.
Go.
Just talk outside.
Come out the doors. Out the doors. Out the doors.
By other media right here. I'm going to listen.
I don't care. You're going to walk out the door.
I'm going to listen.
You're going to walk out the door.
Do not touch mine out, sir.
You're going to walk out the door, or you're going to jail.
Excuse me, sir. I'm the building supervisor here. Please leave.
There you have it.
You're going to stand outside,
Or
you're going to jail.
Let's go. Let's go.
Come on, out. Out. Out the door. Out the door. Yeah, you're under arrest. Under arrest. Excuse me, sir. Sir.
Oh my God! You guys, this is bad. Stop.
I am on the ground. What are you trying to do?
Okay, Stop resisting! Stop this!
This is what it's like to be a black reporter in 2023.
Evan, I'm so sorry. Evan, I'm sorry.
Thank you, C.
Court records show he was charged with resisting arrest and criminal trespass for refusing police officers who told him to calm down and later get out as he continued to disrupt the event. In fact, the video showing his arrest shows other reporters who did not disrupt the event covering the arrest, as well as the other journalists back at the press conference who didn't get arrested. It seems to be the case that Lambert was not actually arrested for trying to reveal the truth, though I'm sure that'll be a great bump to his career. Instead, he was arrested for being an asshat. However, there is a political angle that we can discuss here. Pete Buttigieg, the Biden administration's transportation secretary, spent his time during this disaster talking about how there's too many white males in blue-collar jobs.
To work with your contractors, to work with your community colleges on building a workforce that reflects the community. We have heard way too many stories from generations past of infrastructure where you got a neighborhood, often a neighborhood of color, that finally sees the project come to them, but everyone in the hard hats on that project looking like, doing the good paying jobs, don't look like they came from anywhere near the neighborhood.
Right.
You can build community wealth that will help close wealth gaps in this country.
He had nothing to say about it until February 13th, even though it's clearly within his jurisdiction. Some people are attempting to blame President Biden because back on December 2nd, 2022, he signed legislation to stop a strike of railroad unions by forcing on them an employment contract. However, that specific strike was not over railroad safety, but instead over paid sick days. And it doesn't seem likely that railroad safety would have been affected had the strike been able to go through. Railroad safety is an important part of this conversation, though, because of how the train derailed in the first place. The National Transportation Safety Board discovered that the derailment was caused by a mechanical issue on one of the rail car's axles. Surveillance footage of the rail line showed that 20 miles before the disaster, one of the axles was on fire. Let's rewind a bit. November 30th, 2012. The same thing happened, this time in New Jersey, a derailed train carrying vinyl chloride. This time, though, there was no problems with temperature or flames, and a burn-off was not necessary. They simply had to drain the tankers and physically haul them away. But in response, the Obama administration made it a priority in 2014 to regulate the railways for additional safety. A key component of their plan was requiring companies to implement a newer, more effective, but more costly braking system that could be activated in a pinch to stop trains more quickly and possibly prevent or minimize a derailment. They're called ECP Breaks, or electronically controlled pneumatic brakes. The current braking system used on trains was first invented in 1868, and it's remained more or less intact. The conductor controls the flow of air into and out of the brake pipe from the locomotive, and as the pressure moves through the system, the train's brakes activate. Therefore, it can take up to 2 minutes for a long train to fully slam the brakes, because air pressure through the pneumatic system has to move. However, ECP brakes are set up that each car has its own system, and they are activated all at the same time electronically. This provides better train control, it shortens the stopping distance of a train, and it also leads to a much lower risk of derailing the train as all of the cars brake at the same time, rather than the front cars braking and the back cars still moving the same speed. Here's a chart of Railway Corporation donations to both Republican and Democratic candidates. Sometimes the donations are about even, but during cycles where Democrats have talked about regulating railways, like for example, during Bill Clinton's second term or during the Bush years, railway companies tend to donate 3 to 4 times more money to Republicans. And it was no different under Obama. In 2008 and 2010, it's even. By 2012, though, when the New Jersey accident happened, the money flows to the right again. In September of 2018, railway companies, with Norfolk Southern at the forefront, successfully lobbied the Trump administration to reverse the Obama-era decision requiring trains hauling hazardous materials to implement ECP brakes. The Corpo's claim was that it would cost them more than $3 billion to implement the new brakes, a cost that they could not afford. The rule change was first tossed around during a December 2017 Department of Transportation meeting, where Republican Senator John Thurn, the chair of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation at the time, said publicly that repealing this rule puts sound science and careful study by the Independent National Academies of Sciences and Government Accountability Office over the flawed guesswork used in 2015. While new technologies offer potential improvement to railroad safety, regulators have a responsibility to fairly evaluate effectiveness and avoid arbitrarily mandating new requirements. I applaud the department's new leadership for reacting appropriately to the findings of independent experts and fixing a mistake. It's possible that the new crop of Republican lawmakers, who may have been influenced by campaign donations, decided at the behest of private industry to re-look at the Obama-era regulations, requiring ECP brakes on trains hauling hazardous materials. During this December 2017 meeting, which led to the September 2018 repeal, these Republican lawmakers cited this paper as proof that the regulation was not necessary. Published by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, a congressional watchdog body meant to keep the executive branch in check, on October 12, 2016. The Department of Transportation's rulemaking on electronically controlled pneumatic brakes could benefit from additional data and transparency. The paper claims that the Department of Transportation oversold the effectiveness of ECP braking and that there is not enough data on their effectiveness. The paper claims that the Department of Transportation's studies and figures regarding this effectiveness could not be reliably replicated by private scientists and engineers working for these corporations. That being said, other countries like Canada, Japan, Australia, as well as countries across the EU, have employed ECP brakes to positive effect, and it is generally believed to be an improvement on safety outside of America. Though the corporations are correct, it is costly to implement. Nonetheless, when Republicans took power in 2016, they leaned on this paper to advocate for the removal of the ECP brake requirements, and Trump ordered the Department of Transportation to implement the rollback in 2018. This is all common knowledge, but not really known about outside of these circles. Harvard has a comprehensive timeline of the political back and forth regarding the regulation and then later the repeal surrounding ECP brakes. And a letter written by the leader of the Railroad Workers Union to President Biden makes a passing reference to the rejection of ECP braking as a problem within his industry. It's too early to know if the situation would have truly been helped if American trains had ECP brakes like the rest of the developed world. But considering that one of the train's axles was on fire 20 miles before the crash, which investigators cite as the primary reason for the derailment, it is certainly possible that better brakes could have brought the train to a halt quicker and more effectively before the disaster got any worse. In fact, a former Federal Railroad Administration official personally believes that this is the case, that this accident could have been largely mitigated with ECP brakes. If that's true, then we have several culprits here. We've got railroad corporations who have fought necessary regulation of their industry tooth and nail, and who have refused to voluntarily implement the safety procedures themselves, instead opting to use their profits to conduct stock buybacks. We've got Trump, who repealed the Obama-era regulation, and any Republicans who supported him. And we've got Biden, who failed to re-implement the regulation. Though considering how much is on Biden's plate right now, and how his brain seems to be literally leaking out of his ears sometimes, I'm not surprised he didn't remember that this was an issue. But surely other Democrats did, and they also failed to act. Hopefully, now that this shit show is underway, they'll stop forgetting and actually do something about this. America is the most developed country in the world. There's no need for you guys to be fucking things up this badly. Yeah, I know that libertarians are going to until the cows come home about regulation, but I don't want to hear it. The corpos fucked up, the Democrats fucked up, and the Republicans fucked up. And not just establishment ones, but Trump too. If investigations turn out that ECP brakes would have prevented this disaster, then everyone here is culpable.
I literally grew up right down the road from East Palestine. My old childhood best friend lives in the fucking town. My current best friend literally lives right next to the town. It is so much worse than what the media is telling any of us. I'm getting reports from people that are down there right now that they're literally seeing schools of fish floating down streams, rivers, fucking dead. I got a video from my friend, okay? And she's like walking, dude, it's all fucking dead. All fucking dead. And on the top of the water is a really pretty chemical rainbow sheen. The chemicals are in the fucking water and they're lying to the rest of the country saying they're not. The water's been contaminated. The soil's been contaminated. The fucking air is contaminated. You literally are about to see some of the worst fucking health side effects coming out of people in that town. It's not even funny. And y'all want to know something even more fucked up? The restaurant that I work at in a whole different state had to donate food to them because we had people from the churches calling to tell us that Red Cross never fucking came, FEMA never fucking came, the environmental conservationists still have yet to fucking come, and nobody's fucking helping them. Meaning all of the fucking firefighters that were working get no food, have nothing to help them, nothing. Okay, all the people that were displaced have no food. water, a place to stay. None of that shit. It is so much worse than what they're telling you, and TikTok probably won't even let me post this video, but if this video gets posted, please save it and repost it everywhere you fucking can, because I'm telling y'all, they are covering this shit up. They are covering this shit up because they don't want to get out how bad it actually was. This was not good. This was the worst fucking thing that's happened probably in the past 8 years.